All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back John Hewlett, my friend and the founder of one of our sponsors, Cardio Miracle. John, how are you doing?
Greg, I'm doing just great. Of course, it's a beautiful time of year. I happen to, like yourself, live in the desert, and a lot of people don't realize who don't live in the desert how the flowering of the desert plants is unbelievable in May. It's like unbelievable. I mean,
well, people can tell maybe even a little in my eyes right now because it's that time of year.
But it's wonderful. So I just love driving throughout my area and seeing all of these amazing cactus and plants. And that's one of the great. And the other thing that's really fun in our area is we have quail. And the other day I was driving through our subdivision, and there was a mother. And there were these quail, they were like this big. I mean, they must have just been born. That you could barely almost see them following their mother across the road. And, it's so interesting seeing how I had one time I lived on a ranch in Montana, and we had geese. And the geese every spring would have their 6, 8, sometimes 12 babies. And the way they cared for them. And then I watched these quail, hovering and keeping their little ones with them. It's really a fascinating thing. It's too bad that everything in the world can't stay small. It's too bad we have to grow up. And
innocence is bliss. It's that doesn't last too long, unfortunately. So, we've got 2 large parks right next to our house, and we have a lot of duck and a lot of geese, and they rule everything around, right? Because
they do.
They're going to go from one park to the other. And so they cross a busy road. And as soon as they start stepping out into that road, it's everything halts, right? All the traffic stops.
Really? That's great.
You get the mom with all her babies behind her going across, and everything stops at that point. So they kind of rule the area here.
There's some videos. In fact, and then I just read this morning, I guess one of the top wildlife photographers in Alaska got stomped to death by a moose because he got too close to the babies. And he's 70 years old. His son said he knew the dangers. He don't worry about tracking down the moose and killing it. He says it was his fault. He got too close. He was trying to get the best possible shot. And so we have an interesting world. Mothers protect their young, fathers protect the family. And, that's the way it should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you been following at all the Harrison Butker story, the kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs?
I really have, because I happen to, I've met Andy Reid a number of times, and he's actually one of my favorite people. I just love the way he's balanced. I mean, he was a convert to the church. He came to BYU and wasn't a member, and he's become such a great example, I think. I mean, he's a player's coach, but he's also a man of impeccable standards.
Great guy.
And I was seeing how the wife of the Hunt,
CEO.
CEO, the wife totally stood up for him. Andy basically said they get rid of Buckner, and he says, then you can get rid of me. And then I saw yesterday that our old woke Travis Kelce basically said, it's me or him. And I thought, okay, see you later, Travis.
I didn't see that one. So he said it's me or him?
Well, that's what I saw. Maybe it was a clickbait headline, but I think that I don't know. I saw that. And so I was like, oh my gosh, don't do that, you stupid. Of course, the way he treated Andy Reid in the Super Bowl was horrific. The way disrespectful he was. And that really, the whole Taylor Swift and Travis thing and kind of was out of hand. I'm a big sports fan, but I'm a huge Andy Reid fan. I actually had the privilege of being a very decent, close enough friend with Lavelle Edwards. And Lavelle and Andy Reid, to me, are two of the same bowl of cloth. Two of the greatest guys ever in the coaching profession, and having had lots of coaches in my day, from ones who were cheerleaders and inept at coaching, and ones who were great coaches but lousy people. I know a lot about that from my years in sports. And boy, give me somebody, a person who believes in their players, but at the same time brings out the best in you. And that's what you'd hope for to coach.
I'm fascinated with this story, and I'm doing a couple episodes on it because it's just such a barometer on our culture right now. This guy comes out and has the gall, the kicker, right? Butker, he has the gall to suggest that women be homemakers.
Yeah.
And the whole world falls apart here around this. It is, imagine you talk about, women having choice, right? And it's like, okay, well, if someone comes out and suggests that women go out and have careers in the corporate world and climb the corporate ladder, is that also a problem? Right? Because you're not giving them a choice. It's so preposterous. And the response in the cancel culture on this is very concerning to me, because it's to say that someone should lose their job, because that's basically what's happening, right? All the finger pointing and the shaming is all saying, get rid of him. And it's, and the NFL coming out against him. What does the NFL have to do with this?
Yeah, seriously.
They have nothing to do. He's not there as an NFL player. He is there as a person, as a Catholic at a Catholic college.
Yeah.
Expressing opinions and doctrine of his Catholic religion. And the NFL feels that they need to get involved and virtue signal to the world and against what he is saying. He can have his opinions. It's okay.
Well, and it's like, it would have been like Steve Young talking to the graduate class at Rick's College in 2000. And, they had 900 Catholic students. And he's talking to Catholics as a Catholic about their beliefs and calling them out for those who don't believe what they believe. That's what he was doing. So it'd be like somebody who's a high, like Donny Osmond giving a talk to a stake center at a fireside and standing up for the family proclamation. And then they want to, it is outrageous, but you're exactly right. And the effort we see that we embrace or we tolerate, it's so interesting that we're supposed to tolerate everyone else's beliefs and lifestyles. And yet when we even just speak up and stand up for our own, we're then castigated and in many cases lose our jobs. We had the last 4 years, we saw that in full play, that people lost their jobs for standing up for things they believed in or things that they didn't agree with. And yet, one side, we hear a world of pro-choice or pro-life, and yet when it came to our own health, we didn't even have, we were mandated in certain things. And people, I have a neurosurgeon who I know, who's one of the finest physicians in America. He literally got excoriated and fired from his hospitals because he took a stance saying he felt the doctor-patient responsibility was between them, not to be mandated by the government. And he literally lost a high six-figure career over sticking up for what he took as the Hippocratic Oath and trying to do no harm or do what he felt was right. So we're really in troubled times when that happens. And even when you, as a podcaster on an independent situation, it's so interesting how we can't even have civil disagreements anymore. And there were a few that said, hey, I don't agree with everything he said, but I agree with some of what he said. Well, fine. Who cares? The guy said what he wanted to say. And if they're college graduates or if they're any kind of intellect, it's not like he was bamboozling people with his intellect. I mean, the guy's a kicker, for heaven's sakes. And he was just giving his opinion as a committed Catholic and as a husband and as somebody who's grateful that his wife made the choice that she made to help support him and to help build the family. But he probably would have been fine if she was a nurse or a school teacher or whatever. He was just celebrating the fact that the choice as a homemaker and mother was an important one. I happen, Greg, to have had a superstar mother. My mother was a superstar, and she could have done anything. She could have run a company. She could have run our country. People used to compare her to, they used to say that my mom was like Margaret Thatcher crossed with the Church's Relief Society president, but she devoted herself until all of the kids were in school, until after my parents' mission to the family. And then she went into a career, and within like 5 years, she was the head of financial aid at a major university. I mean, she was that capable. But I look back and I think, boy, am I glad that she gave me all the attention instead of being gone all the time, and my brothers and sisters. But she made a choice. She made a sacrifice for us, but she felt that was more important. So I have a really hard time when I see a great mother, a great matriarch, I celebrate that just as much as somebody who's a millionaire realtor or a millionaire successful CEO of a company. I think we just need to chill and let people make their own choice. And for heaven's sakes, we need to err on the side of righteousness and what we believe actually is the purpose of life in the first place.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you're going to see a lot of people within even our own faith that are not going to do that. They're going to have a completely different attitude on this, and they're going to go along with the cancel culture. It's a little concerning. Yeah. I wanted to go into a little bit more about Cardio Miracle. So what I kind of put these little, evidences, I guess, up in my own experience in using it. It's been a year and a half now or so. And, when we first tried this out, I wasn't going to have you as a sponsor until I had tried out the product. I think I tried it for 90 days.
You were a tough one, Greg.
I was a tough one. Yeah. I wanted the science behind it. I wanted to experience it myself. And of course, I took the labs before I took it, and then I took the labs after 90 days. Big change. Blood pressure completely different. Just so many different things started happening. The two biggest things that have happened more recently for me, and again, this is my experience, right? That's all I'm claiming here. Yeah. But last September, I went into the cardiologist and I had an angiogram, and he said to me, "Your arteries look fantastic." And I can't tell you the relief I had, because I am a triple bypass survivor. And the relief that I had when he said that, I was shocked, honestly, because typically you have a deterioration in these things after a number of years, and it's been 8 years, since my surgery, and
which was at a very young age.
A very young age, yeah, so very surprising.
Genetic lifestyle combination. Even though you were living gospel principles of dietary, the word of wisdom, you still had the problem. And going to the gym daily. It didn't matter. Both of my parents died of a heart problem, right? But one of a heart attack and one of a heart that went out. And so that was incredible. And then just more recently, when I first started Cardio Miracle, I started using it, and I've been a chronic gout sufferer since I was 23 years old, also very young, right? And when I say chronic, I mean, when I was first started Cardio Miracle, I had gotten to a point, I was at Mayo Clinic, and I had gotten to a point where I had their top specialists working on me. And I was getting gout attacks twice a month, and you were taking, and we couldn't stop it, and they kept having to give me prednisone, and you can only take so much of that stuff, and so eventually I couldn't even take that, and they tried other things, and so I was just in this massive pain all the time because I couldn't get rid of it, and so then it started dying down. I'm like, oh, we're down to once a month, and then it was like one every 2 months. I have not had a gout attack in the last 4 or 5 months. And wow,
so that's another thing that started happening, that started changing. And so, look, and again, this is my experience. I'm not saying that's everybody else's experience. And, but I can say that apart from the experiences, I can show my lab results, and I'm like, wow, this is really different.
Well, it's interesting because I had the same thing, hereditary heart disease, because because gout is a cardiovascular indicator.
Yes.
It's one of the indicators. And so because of that, and diet is part, stress is part, genetics is part. But anyone who's, I guess whenever I get my cynical people on my podcast who think that we're, talking snake oil, I go, I wish upon them gout, because if they had gout, they would want to find answers for pain. Because let me tell you, when you have a gout attack, you are borderline wanting to take your own life. I mean, It is miserable. It is horrific. It's kind of like having probably labor pains and child delivery all night long and for several days. And please forgive me, ladies. I have no concept of childbirth, but all I can tell you is when you have a gout attack, and I've had them in my ankle where I couldn't even walk. I've had them in my arm that it throbs constantly, or my fingers, or a toe, or the worst part for me, Greg, is on the top of my foot.
I've had that.
Oh, it's brutal. And so I have seen a dramatic change in my life as well. But when I go on a cruise and I eat too much gravy, too much sugar, too much seafood, too much of the things you shouldn't eat that helps to create this uric acid, I end up going into an attack. And then I reluctantly take occasionally the alpurinol or the anti-inflammatory, which the side effects and impact on your liver is horrible. And so, but the pain is so bad, and you can only eat so many cherries or take as much charcoal in capsule form to purify your blood, and drink enough water. And then if you don't feel like eating because it makes the gout worse, and so when you are not eating, that creates more uric acid. So you're in this terrible cycle of misery. And so anyone who does have a gout issue, you may want to check us out. The other thing is, we're seeing tremendous benefits with breathing issues, as far as a little oximeter to people as their oxygen dropped. That was the reason a lot of people with COVID ended up in the hospital. And then ultimately, unfortunately, some through the protocol ended up on ventilators, which was about a 97% fatality rate on the ventilators. I lost several dear friends who went on ventilators. Others, we were able to get them out of the hospital without being on a ventilator. They're still alive. But we've seen some terrible, terrible things by the oxygen side. And part of the thing of heart disease in the lungs is the inflammation of capillaries, which does impact the oxygen delivery, which is why nitric oxide is so important. It delivers oxygen, it creates blood flow, and it makes your arteries more flexible. So for people that don't know about Cardio Miracle, what its primary function is, I mean, it's got several other ingredients, top level ingredients that in this product, but it's going to trigger your body to produce more nitric oxide, and this nitric oxide is going to reduce the inflammation in your body overall. But especially from what my understanding is, look at this, it dilates your vessels in your arteries and opens them up more so that you have a greater blood flow. It lowers your blood pressure in the process, and it actually repairs the lining of those arteries and those veins. And so it's really something. And there's a lot of science behind this. You've got a great delivery system with the vitamin D3 and everything else. It's my brother just started it, and he says, "Does this stuff really work?" I said, "Look, I'm just going to tell you again. This is what's happened with me. That's all I'm going to say. Give it a shot yourself and see what happens." So, well, I appreciate that. And again, we say to people, just try it. Money back guarantee. If you think this is nonsense, then fine. If people, who wants to live with premature heart disease? I mean, was having that triple bypass helpful in your life? Well, it kept you alive.
Not fun.
But you'd have preferred to have not had that experience. So the reality is, and who wants a stroke? So anything you could do to help prevent things. And the reality is there's a lot of suspicion over what happened in the last couple of years and what's going on in our world between the exposure of GMOs in our food and EMFs with the environment and other things. And there's obviously there's a lot of evidence showing that what we experienced the last few years was was not just an accident of something flying out of a cave in China. So why wouldn't you want to build your immune system? I mean, and building your immune system gives you a healthier, happier life. And you know, because when you're feeling well, you're able to serve and you're able to do things. When you're in bed or have a gout attack, you really can't be a great advocate or missionary or even fulfill your church callings or family callings when you don't feel well. So.
Well, all right, let's get on to Kirtland here. You've got some updates on Kirtland, what's happening there, and I wanted to cover those things. Obviously, we had the big purchase of the temple. We had several buildings and land that was purchased in Nauvoo as well, but you've got some updates on these things.
Yeah, I just, the last time I was dealing a lot from my memory, which actually is still pretty good at 72, but I found one of the people that actually recruited me, the person who recruited me into helping to raise the initial 14 million for the Kirtland project. What happened was that there were the mission president and the stake president hooked up in Cleveland back in the 1990s and 70s. Actually, the late 70s is when first President Kimball said we need to do something about Kirtland, which was interesting because David Haight said that there wasn't one member of the church in the Kirtland area in the 70s. And so President Kimball kind of opened the door, and then there was actually a curse. It's interesting. It says in Hiram Smith said, all the saints that dwell in that land are commanded to come away, for this is, thus saith the Lord, therefore pay out no monies nor properties for houses or lands in that country, referring to Ohio. For if you do, you will lose them. For the time shall come that you shall not possess them in peace, but shall be scourged with a sore scourge. Yet your children may possess them, but not until many years shall pass away. So that was the Hiram Smith prophecy, sending a letter to the Kirtland saints. Well, it was many years. In fact, it was until almost the 80s when it says, so President Kimball was visiting with Carl Anderson in July of 1976. Don Brewer had just been called to be the mission president there. And Spencer Kimball said, I feel that the key was turned in the lock that held Kirtland captive for many years that opened the way for restoring the Kirtland village. So President Kimball visited Kirtland in 1976. And then this Elder Brewer, Don Brewer, and his wife were called to be mission president. They were expecting to go to South America. Last minute, it ended up being Columbus, Ohio. And then they ended up in Kirtland. And so he started praying and fasting about what they could do to get missionaries in Kirtland. And there was an ordinance that said that there was no door-to-door selling in Kirtland. And so there was actually a city ordinance. And for the years before the 1980s, missionaries would almost be arrested if they tried to knock doors or to proselyte. So President Brewer prayed about it, and he took his mother to the Whitney store. The Whitney store had been bought by Brother Woodbury from Bountiful. He had a dream that said, he woke up and told his wife, says, I'm supposed to go find out who owns the Whitney store and buy it for the church down the road. So he went and did that. And then President Brewer was in the Whitney store. He was praying in the School of the Prophets room, and the whole scene came before me, according to his journal. I knew what I was supposed to do and how we were going to put missionaries in Kirtland. I saw the elders moving in, living upstairs in the Whitney store. I knew the missionaries would walk the streets of Kirtland again. So they send them as historical missionaries to essentially record and gather information. So they were researchers, not missionaries, proselytes. So he said, he prayed, and his answer was, there would be no proselyting. Do not initiate any conversations. Be warm and cordial, but do not elaborate. Let them continue the conversation. Do not, in any under circumstance, offer to sell or give anyone a Book of Mormon. You're to act as official, historic, fact-finding missionaries. Do research in the libraries, newspapers, the History Center. Dress as missionaries. Walk the streets in the historic areas 3 or 4 days a week for 2 or 3 hours. Just walk around in their white shirt and tie.
Wow.
Take pictures of the homes. Then the result was, from that guidance he was received, curious neighbors began stopping them and saying, "What are you doing here? Who are you?" They said they were sent by the church to learn about the history of Kirtland. Because of their friendly, non-threatening approach, soon they were invited into the homes of many residents. They became friends with the residents and community leaders, and the acceptance of the church began. And then President Brewer, Don Brewer, laid the groundwork. He said he studied the ordinance and felt it had been misinterpreted. It applied to door-to-door salesmen and not to religious groups. So in August of 1978, he visited with the mayor of Kirtland, who agreed and referred him to the city attorney for corroboration. The attorney agreed and said, "There's nothing to keep you from that work." So it was Don Brewer having this dream and this impression to have this low-key presence and then studying it. And ever since then, that's when it started. Don Brewer also had a vision in the night. Just, we prophesied in the Old Testament that we would dream dreams, and lots of people. It wasn't all going to happen at the church office building. But here's a recollection of his dream, which I think is fascinating. "I saw myself standing in front of the Kirtland temple, speaking with a stranger. I looked at the temple, marveled at its beauty and simplicity. As I stood gazing, I beheld a vacant lot, a vacant area of green grass, and I said, 'There upon that vacant lot, our church will build a visitor center where the public may come and hear the story of the temple and its purpose.' The stranger emphatically stated, 'You can't build a visitor center on that lot. It belongs to the reorganized church.'" This is in his vision. I immediately turned around, looking south along the street running in front of the temple. I saw a 2-story building on the other side of the road. Pointing to the building, "All right," I said, "we will build it where that building now stands, and we will tell the world the story of this magnificent temple." Because the dream was so powerful and intensely engraved in my memory, I understood it was part of my mission. Months later, I was given to understand that 2 visitor centers would be built, one by the reorganized and one by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then it said, on July 13th, he was driving with his wife and his son because when he was first coming to Kirtland, because he didn't want to see the temple until he stopped and I got out of the car. Because he'd had this vision, but he'd never seen the temple in person. I walked along the sidewalk with my head down until I could see the shrubbery along the fence. Scarcely breathing, I slowly lifted my gaze, and every detail was there exactly as I had seen it in my dream. And yet this was the first time I'd ever been to Kirtland. Words can scarcely express my feelings of gratitude the Lord had seen fit to preserve this beautiful edifice. So it was interesting. So then they determined in 77 that property was available. He sent a letter. So and then you'll love this, Greg, because so President Brewer had these visions, had these promptings, had these impressions. He sent a letter detailing his vision and requested that the church buy the property and build a visitor center in the Kirtland area.
Based off of his dream or vision.
Of his dream and his vision and his calling, and his special setting apart by Elder Haight. Mm-hmm. The request was denied, which doesn't surprise me. The Kirtland, in February of 1980, the visitor center was approved. To avoid creating too much interest and encouraging a bidding war, the land was purchased confidentially down in the Flats area. In 89, the church purchased 14 acres of the Morley farm. As part of it, they let the widow who lived in the home from the family stay there. And this is a funny story that I'd mentioned, but June of 1991, Elder Lawrence C. Dunn, visiting the mission and the Whitney store, which sat at the corner, feet away from an intersection. As he stepped out of his car, he was nearly hit by a passing vehicle. The church determined that no restoration could begin until the 2 roads were moved. Now we're talking about city roads, moving them. snowball effect, the rerouted roads had to go over a river with no road traffic. Telephone poles and power lines were out of place. The power lines are like, they're like this big. I mean, you stand underneath them, you feel like you're snap, crackle, and pop. I mean, it's crazy. It would be costly and time consuming to bury the lines, but it had to be done. In 92, the church granted permission to buy the land to reroute the dangerous roads.
And there was now they would said about, but there was still, as I recall, I thought there was money that was raised for that also.
That's the money I was involved in.
Yeah.
That's when I got involved after 92. And in 97, the Kirtland Committee, a division of the Mormon Historic Sites, was formed to raise private funds. So it was 97. So 95 to 2001, church funds would not be used. So President Brewer and former missionaries, one of them named Cully Davis, who's one who I know, spearheaded the fundraising effort. They raised $13 million in private donations to make the infrastructure changes in the village, to also look toward the new visitor center, produce a video. Well, the thing that's interesting, now, Greg, you've been involved in fundraising and, money things and everything else. Imagine going out and raising money for a temple that we didn't own. All the major sites in Kirtland were owned by the Community of Christ or the reorganized church. And you're going to a donor saying, we're not sure when the church is going to do something here, but donate to us to help bury power lines that are unsightly in a city across America. And we're going to move 2 roads. We're going to move 2 city streets and then build a couple of bridges to help make this area down below the temple. Well, most people say, hey, give me a call when you want to buy the temple. I'll donate to that. Mm-hmm. But donate to moving a road and to building a bridge and to burying power poles. It was a little bit of a tough sell. And but for whatever reason, I got involved and was instrumental in helping with the first $1 million, which got us kind of going. And primarily is because I took this video that we paid to get made, and it ended up in the hands of Robert Gay, Elder Robert Gay, who ended up being a major, major part of that. And so 2001, the ribbon cutting and dedication for the 2 new roads. They dedicated the 2 new roads and 2 new bridges to bypass the Kirtland village. And then in 2002, the first phase of restoration was complete with the historic Kirtland's Visitor Center, the restored Whitney store, and the reconstructed Johnson Inn. And then there was the Ashery and the schoolhouse. So it was amazing. And of course, those who saw the other video, I don't want to be redundant, but that's when Steve Young, before the roads, when we were working on the roads, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, had spoken at a fireside to the Kirtland region. And it said, Kirtland City of Faith. One of the city council people's sons saw the Sports Illustrated article, called his mother called the mayor. They called Carl Anderson. Carl Anderson called Neil Maxwell, called Steve Young. Steve Young had just so happened to have like the final game in Cleveland or whatever, that he was going to be there on a Monday night. They ended up inviting the city council, signing autographs, taking pictures. And the next week they voted unanimously to allow the Latter-day Saints to have these zoning changes and to be able to build this restoration of the village. The temple was still not in place. I remember talking to people and saying, what would it take to get the temple? And they said, I don't know. It used to be, we thought they offered in the 80s or whatever, 5 million and then 10 million and then 25. It ended up being a lot. But I've already talked to people who went back there for the eclipse and everything. I guess the eclipse was like right over the temple practically. And people had an amazing, amazing experience there. And I guess it's been wonderful, because now instead of the message that the Community of Christ had basically turned it into like a historical museum type of tour, now they're talking about the wonderful visitations of deity, the miracles that happened, hundreds of people saw angels at the dedication. I mean, there are so many spiritual things that are irrefutable because of the multiple diaries and things that confirm them, that it's arguably the most sacred site, this and the Sacred Grove, and of course the Holy Land in our theology.
Yeah, it's, you go through and you listen to what you're saying there and you realize all of the Lord's hand involved in so many things before we get to this point this year. All of the development that had to happen before we were able to get to a point where we were purchasing. And honestly, on the other side too, and I mean the other side I'm talking about with the community of Christ, what was happening with them and the needs that they had, right? And so all these things that happened, it took decades. It took almost 200 years, really, to be able to
50 years from the 70s. I mean, going on 50 years, and then since Hiram and the scourge, it was a solid 130 years or whatever since the time when they were leaving. But Greg, it's interesting because there's a principle here. It's called "after all we can do," that then the miracle follows. And I had to laugh when I read this booklet that was put together that Don Brewer, he told him about his vision, told him about what he thought the Lord wanted him to do, and it was denied by the bureaucracy. The timing wasn't right. And so our timing is not always, as rarely, the Lord's timing, and in all due time. And that was the attitude that Carl Anderson and Don Brewer ultimately took, is it's in the Lord's hands, but we've got to do all we can do. And by having that presence, and also in that mix, they eventually built a church because there wasn't a chapel in the Kirtland area, and then an arson burned it down. So a very negative event ended up being one of the tipping points of ultimately the saints being accepted in Kirtland with the animosity, was because they felt guilty. Our good brothers and sisters in the community of Christ and reorganized church at the time, that somebody burned down the church. I mean, that's kind of like, sounds like Mormonism persecution 3.0 or 5.0 starting up again. And here we are, at the time in the 20th century. So sometimes these negative things lead to positive things. And look at, just like with the Kansas City Chiefs kicker, what may end up being a very, very negative thing in him trying to be canceled is opening up a major, major discussion and hopefully rallying people to standing up for principles of value. I mean, there was a big argument when Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem. I mean, that was a huge problem for a lot of people. But people said, well, he has a right to do that. Well, and then, again, the teams have the rights to do what they want. I mean, if you work for an employer and they don't like what you do, there's certain constitutional privileges that we have and those types of things. But the reality is sometimes we'll be persecuted for righteousness' sake. Abinadi, we all had that in church, the last week. So.
Yep, absolutely. Well, John, that's awesome stuff. Really appreciate the backfill in here on the story of Kirtland. That's very interesting. Love the developments that are happening there. Who knows what's going to happen next year, the year after, and where that might go. But I need to get out to Kirtland. I hope others will try to do that also. I need to get back out there. And do are there other plans for other building or anything else going on out there right now?
The purpose of this little brochure is there's one last thing that these Kirtland revivalists and want to have done, and that's they really would like to have the log cabin on the Morley farm restored. They know the location. Significant events occurred there, including reports in journals of deity visiting the first high priest, where Joseph said that the gospel would be spread throughout the whole world. I mean, there was some great. If you walk up the trail from the Morley farm, it's like 50 yards or 100 yards up on this little hillside. That's where they originally met and had a lot of great things happen. So they're wanting to do that. They're not getting they haven't had the approval to do it. The money could be raised privately, but so we hope that at some point that they'll allow that. But with the church's purchases, we'll be seeing, I'm sure, the renovations and the restorations. There's probably going to be some. I mean, recently, a few years ago, there was some maintenance and some reinforcement done with the Kirtland Temple. But knowing knowing it to the extent that we went with the Salt Lake Temple and the St. George Temple and the Manti Temple and all of these historic temples, I would suspect there'll be some pretty aggressive things done to make sure that now that we have the temple, that it'll be well provided for. So it's exciting time. And Greg, seriously, it is truly between the Whitney Store, School of the Prophets, the Morley Farm, and the log cabin area, and then the Johnson Farm where Joseph went through so much and did so much of the translating and the revelations for the DNC. It's a feast, a spiritual feast that you can feel the spirit there dramatically. It's very similar to how you might feel in the Sacred Grove, and then Cumorah, Sharon, Vermont, in the Grove there, and at the river. I mean, all of those. But I would say everyone take advantage of the opportunity to go to Kirtland and feel the spirit there. You will feel the spirit in the School of the Prophets, because some people actually feel that when our Father in heaven or the Savior appear somewhere, that it's changed forever in the like the DNA
Sure.
of the living elements. And so I believe that that's true. I know that I felt that multiple times. I had the privilege during the first meeting. We had the first meeting in the whole church since Hiram as Scourge to meet in the Kirtland Temple. They allowed us to meet, and they had the area, the regional reps and stake presidents all from the Northeast gathered there, and I happened to be there. And then with a private tour with Carl Anderson and Lachlan Mackay, who was the apostle who had been the caretaker, and just a wonderful guy. I had a chance to sing for our tour group. I was able to sing I Know That My Redeemer Lives in the Kirtland Temple. That was a thrill. And then of course being there and singing the Spirit of God with a group of leaders and high priests and was an amazing experience. So it's a great place, and I would highly recommend it.
John, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and we'll have you again soon.
It's always great to be with you, Greg. Thanks so much.